Yeah, this film is very much a reaction to this present moment that we're in. I started the film exactly a year ago, basically like today.
Mm,
And it's a very urgent project. It was a very fast-paced exploration. And, I didn't come into the project
right.
knowing a lot of the stuff in the film. I learned a lot. And the connection between machine learning and eugenics
Hmm.
was really surprising. The first time I heard that, I was like, okay, yeah, whatever. And I hung up the Zoom. But actually, it's a story that everybody's talking about. And, um, as I think anyone who uses generative AI technologies, you experience the sort of bias in the systems, the sort of like really simplistic way that it creates a lot of like awkward, racist or sexist outputs, right? But then when you trace this technology back to its, the maths within machine learning, it's really fascinating how the whole notion of creating a data point that's normal and then data points around it that are like less normal, that whole practice of statistical correlation, which is what all these algorithms of the machine learning are, is ultimately highly problematic. And, the ideology of race science and of white supremacy, then as we see it just kind of infect the history of computer science, it lays bare how problematic this technology is in that context. So I think, yeah, I learned a lot. It's quite interesting. I think that we should look at um, AI as a sort of problematic term, right? Like we kind of go into that in the film. It's always been a marketing term. It doesn't mean anything. It has no meaningful discourse inside of the computer sciences in terms of like what actually is AI, right? So, you know, when we're looking at ChatGPT or chatbots or what we might call right now generative AI, these
Hmm.
are not new technologies. What is new is a massive amount of data that's been scraped from the internet, and then massive amounts of power and compute that we haven't had before. But that's not really making anything useful or anything new. It's just creating a statistical modeling machine that produces something that looks kind of novel or it speaks in the first person. But to me, all of that generative AI technology is useless and rubbish and should be abandoned because of the huge amount of infrastructure that is required to run these systems, and they're very real environmental harms, not like oh, it's eroding the ozone layer, like actually depleting the water table in communities. And then you know, so that's kind of one sort of way of looking at it. And then we have like, what we might call narrow AI. That's like spell check or like weather systems, right? Like where you can
Right.
have a grounded data point and you
Right.
can measure it against something real, and you can compute, you can process that data through an algorithm, and you can measure that output based on, something like some sort of index or benchmark. So that's narrow AI, and that's maybe like a more useful way to look at compute algorithms and data. But I think there's absolutely one of the things that we unpack in the film, and one of the things that is central to this project is dismantling this idea that machines can think, or
Mm.
that when ChatGPT is the product is made to speak in the first person, it says, "How can I help you?" And that is so problematic because when we act like machines can think, or that we're building super intelligence, or that they're going to become so powerful, we overlook the real kind of the realities of the harms that are produced by these systems.
Mm.
And and also under that banner, we deregulate. We say, we can't regulate these systems because then we're going to win this like race to build the super god. Yeah, and none of that is true. It's all a bunch of rubbish, as we see in our film when we trace this. Like, where does the idea that machines can think come from? We can kind of see that it's problematic. Yeah. So I think one of the things the film touches on that's quite interesting is how out of eugenics came this idea of IQ, right?
Right,
That that's intelligence is something that can be um, made as an output and measured and ranked on some sort of pyramid of value.
right,
And then when you start to put machines alongside that pyramid of value, it becomes very gross and very weird and very sticky when when it's like, are we putting machine life and is more important than human life because we're using this completely arbitrary mechanism to measure intelligence. And so it's like that logic, I think, is actually the most damaging legacy of eugenics and machine learning. It's this logic of creating a ranking of like so-called intelligence, whatever that is. And then, in the not even like 100 years ago in America, then sterilizing people who, or that certain people, because of their IQ or because of the way they rank on this intelligence meter, they're not valuable. They don't have a place. They should be excluded, or they should be, not here at all. And that's such a grotesque and harmful like worldview. And I think that we can see, as the film opens with someone like Elon Musk posing the question of like, if a machine can do better than you can, do you have value? Like that whole question is wrong, and that whole question is like the problem. And so I think that we can specifically examine ways in which Karl Pearson, the inventor of statistics, or even somebody I don't get into in the film at all, but like, I would encourage people to just like do their own research on like any themes or names in the film that I drop, like go dig deeper because this thing goes so deep and it's such an interesting kind of like story. But there's another mathematician called Mark Fisher who's, um, you know, equally racist as Pearson, and actually kind of continues the story into like more contemporary computing. So it's just wild. Yeah. It I think that the logics of eugenics, when met with the logics of sort of machines performing human level intelligence, that's when we really run into a problem. And I think that's where we are kind of right now.
yeah.
Yeah. If I'm understanding your question,
Yeah,
you're
no,
saying that
what I'm
we have this existential anxiety about
right, right,
AI
right,
being
right, right.
scary in the future, or that it's going to like grow legs and become so massive and intelligent it like kills us somehow. But actually, the real harms are expressed in the system that AI like automates and perpetuates, and then the more real world harms that occur that are not as glamorous as super intelligence killing us all, but like the kind of um, yeah, the inequalities perpetuated within the system by these technologies. So yeah, I think that the one of the ways that we can counteract that aspect of our current moment is by centering our efforts in our communities and our minds in care, in
Right.
nurturing. I mean, I have two young daughters, right? Like
Mm.
when we reframe the conversation into care, caring for each other, caring for our communities, it sounds so boring, right? Like it sounds like so like uninteresting to say that, but that is like the truth. That is the way. And it's this kind of mentality of acceleration, of inevitable technological advancement at any cost. And as soon as we can build super intelligence, that will solve the world's problems. And then we can, like, that's all a lie. And it all just makes, us more divided and makes truth harder to find. But if we can center our like lives and our communities on nurturing and care, feeding each other, looking after our communities, like that's how we get through this. That's how we undo these kind of
After
I think that AI is a sort of, or, one of the themes in the way that governments around the world are handling this
mm,
technology right now is they're choosing not to regulate it. And what that means is they're not regulating the data theft that goes into developing a lot of these large language model systems. We see the kind of abandoning of local planning laws when it comes to putting in these hyperscale data centers. So by deregulating the mechanisms that would traditionally keep this kind of big tech monopoly in place, we're seeing a kind of massive consolidation of power and wealth like we haven't seen before. So that's not unique to any one government. That's kind of everywhere. And I think that again is as a product of the harm of this concept of artificial intelligence, that this very false notion that's always been a marketing term that's supposed to sort of inspire this idea that we're building human-like intelligence, whatever the fuck that, sorry, whatever that means, like it's not a real thing. And it's
Right.
so I think that you know, all governments, are around the world. We do see this trend towards autocracy, this trend toward not being accountable to the people, and this trend toward bending to this, massive consolidation of wealth in the tech space. And, I think the only thing that can, what I love about our film, and Moffat Okinyi, who's one of the co-founders of Tech Worker Africa, says this at the end of the film. He's like, when workers organize, change happens. And I think
Right.
that's been historically true universally across, or, at least globally, that when we can find solidarity in our communities, that's how we can create change. And that's, again, it goes back to these very boring practices of creating solidarity, of workers at tech companies and workers at data companies and workers everywhere, like organizing, like that is a powerful tool we have. And, that's I think where we got to go with all this.
Well, they told me to wrap.
I want people to be unafraid to reject this non-consensual encroachment of generative AI technologies into every digital experience and every piece of digital software we use. At the end of the film, Jonathan Flowers has a beautiful, statement. He says the most radical thing we can do in the age of AI is ask, why does this need AI? And if you can't answer the question, then it doesn't need it. And you can refuse it when it is offered to you over and over again. And you can say, this adds no value here. And I
Mm.
think we have these little pins that we pass out at our screenings that say not AI on them. And I
Okay.
and I think that like having the courage to push back and the courage to say no, and you're not falling behind the times, you're not going to lose out by just saying no, I'm not actually going to integrate this slop into my life. I think that's hopefully something that this film creates space for.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for your time, Barry. I had a good time talking to you. That was
Yeah,
really
you too.
conversation. Thank you so much.